Good evening, students. Today's topic will focus on supply and demand in urban tourism. Um, we will cover the topic tourism demand and also tourism supply. We will first start with the topic tourism demand. What does tourism demand really mean in the urban tourism context? Well, you know what urban tourism means, right? It's tourism that happens in cities, okay, or in urban areas. Obviously, if I had to go more in detail, it would mean that as tourists who visit cities for more than 24 hours, less than 365 days, and obviously utilize tourism services in the cities, okay? But when we look at tourism demand, what are we looking at? It means it basically focuses on the demand of the service, which is tourism. All right, it's looking at the large numbers of tourists, the expenditure of these tourists, the effects of the income, employment, government revenue, the payments made by the tourists. It's looking at the culture, it's looking at the living standards, employment, and also inflation rates, and also the quality of the environment. So when we're talking about the demand, we are basically looking at the individuals who require a service, all right? And how often do they require that service? What type of service do they require? At what level do they require that service? And at what scale do they require that service? So in most destinations or in most cities, the demand is very high based on the type of service required in terms of hospitality and tourism. So if we look at a city like Windhoek, for instance, we know that Windhoek is known for its history and culture. Okay, we know that it's known for entertainment, but what type of service is more in demand in the city of Windhoek? Okay, in terms of tourism, is it hospitality? Is it accommodation? Is it business tourism? Is it leisure? When we look at the city of Windhoek, what type of service do tourists require? Why do tourists come to the city of Windhoek? And these are the type of things we look at when we are looking at tourist demand, the scale and the magnitude of the requirements or the demand, the time spent utilizing that service, the money paid to use that service, okay? And the significance, the importance of that service to tourists. The one thing that we need to look at when we determine demand or we identify demand is certain factors. And these are certain factors that actually motivate people to use a specific service. For example, traveling. So why do people want to come to Namibia, for instance? Why do they want to travel to Namibia? So this will determine the type of demand and the scale of demand the people or the tourists have towards the city. So some of these factors are leisure, recreation, holidays, visiting friends and family, business purposes, health treatment, undertake religious practices, and other personal motives. So we classify demand based on various services or activities that happen in tourism. So we look at sports, we look at adventure, we look at nature, education, religion, sightseeing. And based on these activities, we can actually determine the scale of demand of a specific area. For example, Etosha. We know that people like going to Etosha because of sightseeing, watching the animals, you know, and the demand is high because there is quite a lot of tourists that love nature, okay, that want to experience true nature, viewing of animals like elephants and lions. So the demand in Namibia currently is nature, all right, and culture. Okay. The principles of demand, when we are determining the demand of a specific city, we look at the actual demand, the number of people that are actually traveling to that specific city, all right, and what they're participating in. For example, we know that the number of people visiting Namibia, they are based on statistics, um, they're increasing every year, okay, and for each city or for each attraction, they are rated according to the number of arrivals, all right, and the type of activities they take part in. And so that is actual demand. And then when we look at suppressed demand, is by looking at the part of the population who are unable to travel because of lack of money, for example, or they don't have uh, 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 um, enough leisure time to travel. They are working too much, or it might be that the tourism services are not accessible to them. So we look at the actual demand, the people who have the money and the type of activities they take part in, and then the suppressed demand is by looking at the people who cannot afford to purchase the same service, okay, because either of lack of money or lack of time. All right. So no demand is the same that they're saying. Every demand is different, okay? In every town in Namibia, every demand differs depending on what they offer and depending on the price. So people's demands or tourist demand change based on the various activities. It also depends on the price. It depends on various factors, okay? So there's certain elements that we need to look at that actually push demand, that increase demand. And some of these are things like uh, factors that promote holidays. Okay, so certain factors that actually we looked at is factors that motivate travel, such as leisure, recreation. People want to be with friends and family. Some people want to go to workshops. So these are what we call energizers of demand. Okay, the factors that motivate people to travel are called energizers of demand. They actually initiate or increase demand. Another element that actually initiates demand is the filters of demand. Okay, these are constraints that exist in the economic world, sociological and psychological world. So these actually have an effect on the desire to travel. So when we look at money, your social standing, your income, status, your lifestyle, these are some of the filters of demand that actually can initiate or minimize the demand to a specific tourism service. Okay, factors. These are also other factors which might increase or suppress the energizers. Okay, these are factors are those that may affect your chance to go visit family and friends. They may affect you to travel for business. They might even affect your choice of traveling. So your factors might be even international issues in the world. For example, environmental issues like earthquakes, the COVID-19 that we actually have now. Those are factors that might suppress your traveling, your choice of traveling to a specific destination. So they say reasons why people choose to engage in tourism are very different. And because people's ideas and interests are also different. And it is a process of understanding the psychological effects in tourists, in the way they make decisions upon reasons to travel. So is demand. Now supply, on the other hand, has to do with basically achieving, or the suppliers achieving, the demand of the tourists. Now, providing the services to meet the demands of the tourists, that is supply. So it says it has to do with provision, okay? And it's normally provision comes from the tourism industry. The demand normally comes from the tourist itself or the customers, the need to buy, And then the supply normally comes from the tourists feeding the demand, or the tourist industry feeding the demand of the tourists. Okay, so this type of provision can be maintenance, it can be promotion, it can be management, it can be facilities and resource that is offered to tourists to meet the demand. Okay, so there has to be proper infrastructure, proper telecommunication systems, proper resources or enough resources for us to supply the right service to the tourists to meet and achieve the demand. So supplying the tourism industry involves various components of the tourism product. We know that the tourism product consists of intangible and tangible products. It consists of inseparable, perishable products, heterogeneous. So it's a very unique product. Thus, it can be classified in transport, attractions, hospitality, accommodation, catering, um, meetings, conventions, entertainment, and so forth. And from that, we can still further classify all these services further down. Okay, and as long as we have these resources available and the facilities available in our cities, we can thus be able to supply to the tourists to meet their needs. Now, supply activities include marketing. All right, we have to promote the product to the customers so that they are aware of the product. We have to provide a service that exceeds the customer's expectations, not only satisfying their needs but exceeds them. All right, we have to provide both facilities. We have to provide access to roads, access to destinations, make sure that people have access to our cities so that they can use our services. Because if people cannot access Windhoek through Windhoek International Airport, how else will they be able to utilize the services? We have a case right now in the world, and as you see, all the airlines have been grounded internationally. There is no international flight going in and out of any country. Now imagine that has actually limited access to a lot of hospitality and tourism services. Just imagine how much money is lost due to the fact that all the airlines have been grounded internationally. So accessibility to cities or towns has to be there in order for us to use the tourism and hospitality services. Now, when we talked about environmental and supply dynamics, they say that ecotourism normally is important to include or involve in tourism demand and supply. Okay, so as much as we want the service, the tourism service and the hospitality service, we have to utilize it, as I've spoken already in the previous chapter, in a very sustainable manner, so that the future generation has a chance to have access to these resources in the next years to come. All right, so when we utilize these services and when the tourism industries or companies provide these services to us as tourists, it has to be in a sustainable manner. All right, so the impact, the negative impact to the resources and to the facilities, it needs to be minimized. Hence, when we are using the services, as much as we want to visit Etosha, the number of visitors allowed need to be minimized. The number of, the amount of day visitors need to be minimized in certain campsites or certain attractions, so that we can minimize the negative impact of human activity in those areas. Okay. It is important to match supply with demand. Although we want as many tourists in our city, we must be able to manage the carrying capacity, which I spoke about in the last topic of sustainability. If your country or your city cannot carry and manage the number of tourists coming into the city, it will damage the environment and the economy and the culture of your people. When we talk about matching supply and demand, it means that we need to have enough facilities, enough resources to cater to the number of tourists arriving in the city. Now imagine the type or the number of people we are receiving currently in the city of Windhoek. If you look at the airport that we have, it is actually limited. The space that we have is limited to the number of airlines that are coming into our airport. That is why our government was tasked to actually expand the airport, because based on the number of arrivals of tourists coming into our country, the demand is actually growing and increasing. So we also have to increase our service supply to meet the demand. Okay. That's why they're saying tourism supply should result from the overall definition of tourism and can thus be defined as supply of all assets, services and goods to be enjoyed or brought by visitors and occasioned by the journeys of visitors. So we must make sure that the amount of 1 million people coming in per year in Namibia, we should be able to cater for those people based on the number of accommodations we have, the roads that we have, the attractions that we have. We should be able to cater for all the numbers of people coming in. And so if we cannot cater for them, we should either increase the facilities, the resources to cater for them, or we should minimize the number of people coming into our country. All right. So how do we measure or examine demand? Firstly, through statistics. We look at the number of arrivals at the airport, the number of visitors at the airport, mostly the international airport, which is Hosea Kutako. Secondly, we look at the tourism expenditure and receipts that they at accommodation facilities and at restaurants. It's also very important to look at the shopping malls, how much the tourists spend. That normally, like in South Africa, they collect it from SARS. Or in Namibia from Ministry of Finance is supposed to collect that as where at customs when tourists hand in their taxes to claim for VAT, they can get those expenditure receipts. Also the length of stay in a destination, in the city, in the Etosha National Park, they can actually look at how long do tourists stay in a specific city or in a destination or attraction. And also by looking at statistics from governing bodies. Okay, so this is how we measure and examine demand. So it is very important as a city or as a country to match supply and demand, to make sure that although our country is in demand and tourists love coming to Namibia for the culture and for the natural resource, untapped natural resource, we should be able to meet this demand with the assets. We should be able to match the demand with the assets, with the facilities, with the customer service, with everything that we have within the tourism services to be able to exceed and meet the needs of the tourists as customers. Otherwise, when your area cannot manage and handle the carrying capacity, you get negative impacts like environmental degradation. You find things like crime. You find things like traffic congestion and overcrowding. And so if we cannot match supply and demand, we end up having high negative impacts. Thank you very much for this, for listening in on this topic. Please go into your discussion forum as there is a topic on COVID-19 regarding this topic. Thank you.